The funeral had already begun. Mourners bowed their heads. The coffin lay still, and all seemed quiet, until a blind German shepherd began barking at the casket. At first, they thought it was grief, but the barking turned desperate. Then came the scratching, the whimpering. Something was wrong. When they finally opened the coffin, what they found wasn't just a miracle, it was a message from beyond. A newborn pup, still breathing, hidden beneath the sheriff's coat, and the blind dog. He was the only one who knew. But that's not where the story ends, because someone else watching had a secret of his own, a mistake from years ago. And this time, he wouldn't walk away. Before we begin this unforgettable story, would you mind sharing where you're from in the comments, and if stories of love, loyalty, and second chances move you? Please give this video a like and consider subscribing. Mill Creek, Oregon, was wrapped in a veil of drizzle that morning, a thin silver mist falling gently through the pine branches that towered over the quiet cemetery. The rain was not heavy, but it clung to every black coat, every ribbon of fabric, and to the memories still fresh in the hearts of those who stood around the open grave. The pines whispered in the breeze, as if murmuring their own solemn prayers. Sheriff Tom Matthews had served this town for over 3 decades. He wasn't just a man in uniform. He was the kind of person who remembered birthdays, paid for groceries when no one was watching, and once rescued a drowning moose calf from the lake. At 61, he was tall but slightly stooped from years of long shifts and quiet burdens. His beard had gone half gray in the last year, and the laugh lines at the corners of his eyes betrayed a man who had known both sorrow and grace. He had passed suddenly, a heart attack while alone at home, leaving behind silence where his voice once gave orders and comfort alike. Among the crowd of mourners stood Claire Matthews, his only daughter at 29. Claire carried herself with the steadiness of someone twice her age. She was of medium height, slim but strong, with sharp cheekbones and a jawline that mirrored her father's. Her light brown hair was tied back in a firm, utilitarian bun beneath her deputy's hat. Claire had been raised in the shadow of the badge, but after her mother died in a car crash when she was 9, she grew up faster than any child should have. That loss had left a quiet imprint in her eyes that now stared hollowly at the flag-draped casket. Beside her sat Ranger. He was once a proud K-9 of the county's search and rescue team, a German shepherd with sable and ash fur, thick and matted now from age and disuse. But what drew every glance today wasn't just the dog's former reputation. It was the bright orange blindfold tied gently over his eyes. Ranger had gone blind nearly 2 years ago, a degenerative condition that not even Tom's careful care could prevent. At 7 years old, Ranger still stood tall and alert, but age had stiffened his limbs and softened his bark. Yet, today, he was tense, every muscle poised, nostrils flaring against the damp air as if searching for something beyond the grave. Claire had brought him to the funeral because it felt right. He had been Tom's partner in ways few humans had. They had patrolled flood zones together, hiked search grids through snow, and sat for long hours at the edge of rescue tents when others gave up hope. Ranger had never left Tom's side until death forced him to. The ceremony had gone on, mostly in silence. The priest read from a worn book. A choir hummed a soft hymn, and townspeople, many with heads bowed under umbrellas, listened with clenched hands. But then came the bark. It started soft, a single, low woof, like a breath forced out through memory. Claire looked down. Ranger was standing, head tilted. Ears stiffened under the weight of sound, despite the blindfold. His tail was unmoving, straightened like a taut wire. Claire placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, but he didn't sit. The second bark was louder. A few heads turned. Some thought he was grieving. Others muttered something about how animals just know. The priest continued, faltering slightly. Ranger let out a low growl, something guttural, primal. His paws shifted against the grass, back claws clawing at the wet dirt. His whole body was vibrating. Then came the third bark, sharp, urgent. It echoed under the canopy of pines like a flare in the fog. Claire startled. "Ranger," she whispered, trying to steady him, but he pulled forward, nearly jerking the leash from her grasp. His paws landed against the base of the casket. There was a collective gasp. People began murmuring in confusion. An older woman dropped her umbrella. A young officer, Matthew Crane, 23, newly stationed and unsure of himself, stepped forward awkwardly to intervene, but froze when Ranger snarled low in his throat. Claire moved faster. "It's okay. He's just confused," she said quickly. Though even she didn't believe it, Ranger didn't look confused. He looked focused. His nose pressed along the side panel of the coffin, then scraped at the edge with urgent, rhythmic motions. His body was tense but not trembling. He whined, high-pitched, rising like a question that no one knew how to answer. Deputy Nate Rivers, standing a few feet behind, stepped up beside Claire. Nate was in his early 30s, tall and lean. With dark curly hair he kept perpetually messy under his uniform cap. His past wasn't clean. A recovering alcoholic, he'd hit rock bottom 4 years ago after a drunk driving incident nearly cost a girl her life. But Sheriff Tom had offered him redemption. A desk job first, then a chance at the academy. Now, Nate stood quiet and steady, watching the scene unfold with narrowed eyes. "That's not grief," Nate said quietly. "That's a signal." Claire looked at him, shaken. "But there's nothing in there. She trailed off, uncertainty blooming in her throat. Ranger barked again, twice this time, and pawed harder at the polished wood. The orange blindfold bounced with every motion, yet his body moved with purpose, not confusion. The priest stepped back. The choir fell silent. The rain softened into mist. In the stillness, only Ranger's bark remained. And in Claire's heart, a question began to take root, one that her logic could not silence. What was he trying to tell them? The rain had softened into a mist that hovered just above the pine-lined earth of Mill Creek Cemetery. It clung to coat shoulders and boots, turning the grass slick beneath the mourners' feet. The casket lay still at the front of the gathered crowd, draped in a folded American flag, surrounded by wreaths, wet petals, and unspoken sorrow. Ranger, the blind German shepherd with his orange blindfold tied snugly behind his ears, stood rigid at Claire Matthews' side. His breathing was rapid, his muscles stiff. No one had ever seen him like this, not even Claire, who had known him since he was a spry 2-year-old sprinting beside her father in search and rescue drills. No command could stop him now. Not Claire's gentle hands, not the murmured reassurances from officers nearby. Ranger moved with slow, deliberate urgency. He padded away from Claire's side, his nose low to the ground, tail straight. The orange cloth over his eyes swayed slightly as he walked, unseeing, but undeniably focused. He circled the coffin once, then twice, sniffing each side, lingering near the front. Then he stopped, his head tilted slightly. One paw raised, hovered, and dropped with a single sharp tap against the wood. Then another. Then a whimper, a soft, aching sound that cut through the stillness. Claire took a slow step forward. Her voice was quiet, but tight. "Ranger?" The dog didn't move. He pressed his paw again, scraping the polished panel of the coffin. Another whimper. Then he lowered his body, nose resting on the wood. A soft growl trembling in his chest. People began to murmur behind her. The priest, standing a few feet back, looked unsure whether to intervene or pray. Claire's stomach knotted. Something was wrong. This wasn't grief. This was alarm. Deputy Nate Rivers approached from the left, tall, composed, with rainwater glistening on the brim of his uniform hat. He said nothing at first. He crouched near the base of the casket, resting one hand lightly on Ranger's back. Nate had never been the type to speak unnecessarily. Years of struggling through his own quiet demons had made him observant, silent when needed, intuitive when others weren't. His gaze met Claire's briefly. Then he lowered his head toward the coffin, his ear pressed close to the wood. He stilled. There it was, faint, barely there, but unmistakable. A sound, a soft, muffled mewl, no louder than a whisper carried by wind. Nate jerked back upright. "Claire," he said, voice tight, low, "there's something in there," for a moment. She froze. Then everything moved at once. Claire stepped around the casket and motioned toward the latch. Her fingers fumbled slightly, whether from cold or shock. She didn't know. She found the edge, flipped the mechanism, and lifted. The coffin creaked open. Inside lay Sheriff Tom Matthews, dressed in full uniform, hands folded across his chest, badge polished to a subtle shine. His face was calm, his gray-streaked hair combed neatly, the lines around his mouth softened by stillness. For a brief instant, Claire's heart clenched again with loss. Then she saw movement beneath his coat, a flutter, a twitch. She reached forward, gently lifting one side of the heavy wool sheriff's jacket draped across his torso, tucked beneath the lapel, curled tightly against the warmth still lingering in the fabric. Was a newborn German shepherd pup. It was no larger than a loaf of bread. Its fur was still damp, slicked to its thin frame. Its eyes were sealed shut, its limbs trembling weakly. It gave a soft cry, almost inaudible, but alive. The crowd behind them gasped. Someone covered their mouth. Another stumbled back a step. The rain fell quietly now. Forgotten. Claire stared at the tiny creature, her breath caught. How? She didn't finish the question. No one answered. Even Ranger remained silent now, crouched low, ears forward, breathing steady. Nate stepped beside her and reached into the casket with slow, deliberate care. He cupped the pup in his hands. Its chest rose and fell in shallow rhythm, its nose pressed against his thumb. Without speaking, he slipped off his uniform jacket and wrapped it gently around the fragile form. Ranger let out a low exhale, as if he, too, had been holding his breath. Claire looked back into the casket, eyes tracing over her father's uniform one more time, beneath the stoic stillness of death. A hidden spark of life had survived, shielded, somehow, by a man who had always protected more than anyone ever knew. She swallowed. Her throat felt dry, raw. Nate held the wrapped pup close to his chest, the fabric absorbing what little warmth he could offer. The dog didn't cry again. It simply lay there, still breathing, still holding on. Ranger sat now at attention beside the casket. His posture was proud but quiet. His blindfold had grown damp from the mist, but his expression, if a dog could have one, was calm. Whatever had led him here, he had done what he came to do. The sky over Mill Creek shifted from mist to pale light as the last mourners drifted away from the cemetery. Still whispering about what had just unfolded, the wind moved gently now, weaving between the gravestones, carrying the soft scent of pine and damp soil. Claire Matthews stood by the open casket, her uniform damp at the shoulders, her face pale and unreadable. Ranger sat silently beside her, ears perked despite the orange blindfold that obscured his sight. The tiny puppy lay curled in Deputy Nate Rivers' arms, wrapped tightly in the inside of his jacket. Its breathing had steadied but remained shallow, chest rising and falling against the warmth of fabric and heartbeat. Claire leaned over one last time to brush the collar of her father's coat back into place, fingers lingering on the edge. As she did, something slipped loose, a small, folded square of paper, yellowed and softened as if it had been in that lining for days. It fluttered to the edge of the casket like a leaf. She stared at it for a moment before picking it up. There, in her father's unmistakable handwriting, bold and slanted, were the words, "If I don't make it back, let Ranger finish what I started." Her breath caught. Claire clutched the note tightly, knuckles white, as memories began to uncoil from the shadows of the past weeks. 2 nights ago, she'd heard the front door open at 2 a.m., quietly, like he didn't want to wake her. When she came downstairs, the truck was gone. A half-packed bag sat on the counter, jerky, a fleece blanket, and a small roll of gauze. She hadn't thought much of it then. Her father often answered calls after hours, especially during hunting season. But now, she looked to Ranger, who hadn't moved. The dog's head was tilted slightly toward the casket, as if he, too, knew what had been written inside that note. Claire exhaled and turned toward Nate, who stood beside her, arms protectively curled around the puppy. I think he was trying to help someone," she said, voice just above a whisper, or something. Nate didn't speak immediately. His eyes searched hers, hesitant but focused. "You mean..." He knew that pup was in trouble. Not just the pup. Claire stared at the note again. This wasn't random. You don't write something like this unless you expect not to come back. He knew something was dangerous. He was protecting something. Ranger let out a soft huff. "We need to go home," she added, tucking the note into her breast pocket, "and we need to talk to someone who knew what he was doing." They left the cemetery quietly, without ceremony, heading straight to the Matthews house. It was a modest single-story cabin just outside the edge of the forest, timber-paneled, with faded green shutters and a weather vane that squeaked when the wind turned northwest. The house still smelled faintly of cedarwood and shaving soap. Inside, Claire laid Ranger's blanket near the fireplace, where embers still glowed faintly. Ranger walked forward slowly, nose leading the way. Before lying down, without a sound, Nate followed her into the kitchen. Still cradling the pup, Claire pulled open a drawer near the door, retrieving her father's leather-bound field notebook. She flipped through it, maps, patrol notes, sketches of deer tracks, and markings from trail cameras. She paused at a page dated just 5 days ago. Injured female, Northern Ridge, possibly limping. Will monitor. Not safe to relocate yet. Nate leaned over her shoulder. Injured female could be a wolf. Or a coyote. Claire's eyes narrowed. But my father never mistook a domestic animal for a wild one. Not after all these years. If it was a stray, he would have said so. She turned the page. Took Ranger tonight. Brought food. She didn't eat much. Gave her my coat. 1 pup born. Others didn't make it. Claire's breath stopped. "That pup," she whispered. "It's hers." Nate carefully sat the puppy down on a folded towel near the fireplace. The creature whimpered softly, its paws twitching. Claire sat beside Ranger and looked at him long and steady. "You were there," she murmured. "You saw her?" Ranger didn't respond with a bark this time. Only lowered his head slowly until it rested beside the edge of the puppy's towel. Nate knelt beside Claire. "Why didn't he tell anyone?" Claire shook her head. "Because it was risky. Milk Creek's been crawling with reports of poachers lately. Wildlife disappearing, trail cams busted, people going silent about things they've seen. If he brought a wounded animal, especially one someone might want, back to the station, there'd be questions. Someone might try to take her, or worse." Nate looked toward the fireplace. "So, he hid her in the woods. And kept her alive," Claire added. "Alone, in winter." Silence fell between them for a long moment before a voice called from the front porch. "Claire." It was a woman's voice, soft but firm. Claire rose and opened the door to reveal Marcia Lee, the local librarian and Tom's longtime friend, in her mid-50s. Marcia was petite, with graying hair pulled into a tight bun and eyes that missed nothing. She had a quiet kindness to her that masked an iron will, someone who had once filed a town-wide petition in a single day to save the community's only nature preserve. She held a basket wrapped in cloth. "I brought soup, and something told me you might need a listener." Claire gestured her in. Marcia stepped inside and froze as her eyes landed on the tiny pup. Oh my. Claire told her everything about the casket, the note, the patrol log. When she finished, Marcia sat in stunned silence for a moment before placing her hand over Claire's. "Your father wasn't just preparing for death," she said softly. "He was preparing to make sure life kept going, even if he couldn't." Claire nodded, her jaw tightening, and Ranger, he made sure of it. Marcia looked to the blindfolded dog, who now dozed beside the flickering hearth. "That's what real loyalty is, isn't it?" she murmured, seeing even without sight. The fire in the hearth flickered softly, its light stretching across the wooden floor of the Matthews cabin. The newborn pup lay wrapped in a towel, barely larger than 2 hands, its body pressed against Claire's chest for warmth. She sat close to the flames, her eyes fixed on the tiny creature as if willing it to keep breathing. Each shallow inhale from the pup felt like a victory. Ranger lay nearby, silent now, ears relaxed beneath his orange blindfold, his head resting close to the edge of the towel as if watching over the pup without sight, sensing the rhythm of new life with something deeper than vision. Nate Rivers stood near the entryway, leaning against the wall, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. He didn't speak. His eyes were on Claire, but his thoughts were far from the room. He could still hear the whimper, It hadn't come from this pup. It had come from another. Years ago, one he'd left behind. It had been a bitter winter night, much like this one. The roads were slick with ice, and Nate had been drinking more than he should have. As usual in those days, back then, he was reckless, loud, always the first to raise a glass and the last to leave a bar. He told himself he was invincible, charming, untouchable. He had convinced others too. Until that night. The impact had been soft, softer than he expected. At first, he didn't even know he had hit anything. It was only when he glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the shape in the road, a dark, unmoving mass, that he felt it. Guilt didn't come right away. Fear did. He'd been drinking. There'd be questions, charges. So, he kept driving. The next morning, he saw the flyer on the town bulletin board, a German shepherd, missing. Last seen limping through the trees along Route 9. By then, it was too late to turn back, and even if he could, he wasn't the man who would. He drank more that week, got into a fight at the gas station, slept in his car. When the department called to inform him he'd failed his probation review as a wildlife trainee, he didn't even show up to argue then. The knock on his car window. Tom Matthews. Sheriff's hat tilted back. Jaw firm, but eyes disappointed. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there until Nate opened the door. Nate was still hungover, still slurring apologies. "I don't care what you say," Tom had told him. "You left something to die and walked away. You can't erase that. But you can spend the rest of your life doing the opposite." Nate never forgot those words. Tom gave him a chance, not as an officer, not at first. He had Nate working back office logging equipment, cleaning the garage, handling trail reports. It was months before he let him file anything, a year before he gave him a uniform again. And now, here Nate stood, in the home of the man who'd saved his life, watching that man's blind dog protect a newborn pup with more heart than most people ever showed. He stepped forward, quietly, as Claire adjusted the towel wrapped around the puppy. "It's warmer now," she said softly, not looking up. Nate nodded, kneeling beside her. His voice was low. 4 years ago. "I hit a dog on Route 9. I didn't stop. I drove away." Claire didn't react, her hand gently stroking the pup's back. He continued. "It was late. I was drunk. I saw a poster the next day, realized what I did, and I hated myself for it. Still do." Claire finally looked at him. "Your dad. He found me, brought me in, made me face it, not in court, but here, gave me a job, said if I wanted to make up for it, I had to prove it quietly, day by day." She didn't interrupt. Nate glanced at Ranger, who shifted slightly, the orange blindfold catching the firelight. "When I saw him protect this pup, when I saw how your dad trusted him, I realized I haven't done enough. Not yet." Claire held his gaze. Her eyes were tired, but not cold. "You're here now," she said. "And that's something." Nate nodded slowly. "It's a start." He reached out carefully, letting his fingers brush the edge of the towel. The pup stirred but didn't cry. He looked at Claire again. Maybe this is where it changes. The sun broke through Mill Creek's dense clouds for the first time in days, painting streaks of gold across the dew-slicked grass outside the town's small police station. Inside, the warmth hadn't quite reached the concrete floor, but a quiet stillness filled the air, a sense that something had shifted, ever so slightly, toward peace. In the corner of the break room, an old wooden crate lined with soft towels sat just below the window. Inside lay the tiny German shepherd pup, newly named and finally stable. Its eyes, though not fully open, fluttered beneath fragile lids. Its breath rose and fell steadily now, no longer a desperate gasp, but the steady rhythm of something determined to live. Ranger sat just beside the crate, unmoving, his head lowered slightly, and the edge of his orange blindfold caught the sunlight. His black-tipped ears twitched occasionally, each movement responding to Echo's faint sounds. He didn't need to see to know the pup was there. He felt it in the air, in the warmth, in the soft vibrations that traveled through the floor and into his chest. Claire Matthews stepped in quietly, a steaming mug in her hand, her uniform jacket slung over her shoulder. She had barely slept in the last 48 hours, but the fatigue clinging to her face was different than grief. It was soft now, tinged with something brighter, healing. She crouched beside the crate and reached in, gently scratching Echo behind his ear. "You've got your own guard dog now," she whispered with a smile. "The best there ever was." Ranger let out a quiet exhale, as if in agreement. From the other side of the room, Deputy Nate Rivers entered carrying a toolbox in one hand and a stack of wooden planks in the other. He had changed into a flannel shirt and worn jeans, the kind he used to wear when he was still working field trails. His sleeves were rolled up to the elbows, and a pencil was tucked behind his ear. "I think I've got enough supplies to fix up the old back kennel," he said. "The roof's leaking and one of the gates is rusted shut, but it's salvageable." Claire looked up from the crate. "You're sure you want to take that on?" He gave her a half smile. "We talked about building something in his name. I don't think Tom would have minded starting small. Tom's Haven. It had been her idea at first, an offhand remark she muttered the night before while wrapping a second towel around Echo. A place where animals that no one wanted could find warmth and safety, a shelter not for show, but for healing. Nate had latched onto it immediately. They were still figuring out what that meant, what it would look like, where it would go. But, for now, the back of the station would do. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. The door creaked open again. Anne Marcia Lee entered, balancing a basket of warm cornbread in one hand and a thermos in the other. Her bun was neater today, and she wore a green wool coat buttoned all the way up. She gave off a presence of quiet control, the kind of woman who didn't wait for things to settle before helping. "I brought breakfast," she said simply. "And I called Dr. Geller. She'll stop by this afternoon to check on the pup." Claire stood and took the basket from her. "Thank you. Marcia, you didn't have to." "I know," Marcia replied, setting down the thermos. "But someone should have brought your father coffee every morning. And I missed too many chances." She stepped toward the crate and peered in at Echo. "He's already looking stronger." Nate returned to sorting nails and boards in the corner. "You think the town will support this?" Marcia snorted. "Tom helped half this town fix broken things. Barn doors, fences, marriages. If you think they won't rally behind something with his name on it, then you don't know Mill Creek." Claire smiled softly. "Then we better make it count." They spent the next few hours moving quietly around the station. Nate cleared out the back storage room, dragging old file cabinets and dusty chairs into the hallway. Claire started a list of needed supplies on the whiteboard. Heat lamps, bedding, food donations. Ranger stayed beside Echo, unmoving, except for the occasional shift of his ears or the tilt of his head. By mid-afternoon, Dr. Abigail Geller arrived, in her early 60s, with frizzy gray curls and thick red-framed glasses. She smelled faintly of antiseptic and pine. Her hands were worn from years of treating wild animals, and she spoke quickly but kindly. She examined Echo with gentle fingers, listening to the pup's heartbeat and lifting his tiny paws. "He's lucky," she muttered. "Could have gone the other way." Claire watched her anxiously. "Will he make it?" Dr. Geller nodded, then reached over to pet Ranger. "Because of him, I'd say he's got a future." As the sun dipped lower, casting golden light through the window, Claire sat beside Ranger again. She reached down, stroking the fur between his ears. "We named him Echo," she said, "because he's the last thing Dad left behind, like an echo from his heart." Ranger leaned into her touch slightly, then nudged his nose gently against the crate's edge. Nate stood behind her, holding a small wooden sign, freshly carved with a pocket knife. It wasn't perfect. His hand had slipped on one letter, but the message was clear. Tom's Haven for the lost, the hurt, and the brave. He handed it to Claire. She traced her fingers over the letters, eyes brimming. "Let's hang it up." Outside the station, as evening fell and stars began to push through the pale blue sky, they mounted the sign just above the back door. Ranger sat on the porch, Echo asleep beside him in a soft basket, the firelight from inside casting both of their shadows long across the gravel. Ranger had lost his partner, but he had found something else, something to stay for, something to protect, and behind that orange cloth, behind blindness and years of loyalty, there remained a light that had never gone out. Sometimes the greatest miracles are the ones that arrive without sound, wrapped in fur. Carried by loyalty and guided by hands we can no longer see, Ranger didn't need sight to see what mattered. He simply followed the voice his heart remembered, the voice of his partner, his friend, and through that obedience, a life was saved. This story reminds us that even in loss, God plants a seed of hope. Sometimes, He speaks through those we least expect, a blind dog, a newborn pup, a second chance given at the right time. When we open our hearts to protect the small and the voiceless, we reflect the love He has for each of us. In a world that often feels dark and uncertain, may we never stop believing in the light behind the blindfold and the purpose behind our pain. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to be reminded that miracles still happen. Leave a comment below and type Amen if you believe in second chances. And may God bless everyone who watches this. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and help us spread more stories of faith, love, and quiet miracles.